Hello and welcome to Rebrand Everything. Today we're going to be looking at redesigning the Tesla logo. If we start by looking at the existing logo, we can see that they use a large T icon and then a word mark underneath. The T badge that they use is taken from a cross section of an electric motor, so that's about as relevant as it gets. So I think that'll be worth keeping in some of our design options. The word mark has a very distinctive style. I tried to look into what the word mark is made up of. These little shapes like that build the E and the top of the A have them curved edges, and I started thinking maybe it could be the grille from the cars, or it could be taken from another component from a motor. But I couldn't find anything about that, so I think it's just there to look quite stylized and in a similar style to the T badge. What it could be is that the three layers of the E could be the parts of a lithium-ion battery, but I might just be looking for meaning when there isn't any meaning behind it. It might just be there to look nice. The word mark is used alone on the website, so I think that's going to need a lot of attention. So we're going to make a few different options of the Tesla logo. Some of them are going to be a refresh and some of them will come in from a completely different angle. So I think what we're going to do is jump straight into Illustrator to get the ideas flowing. Let's go. So I prepared a document with the Tesla logo in there that managed to find an SVG online, which was perfect paths. So that's brilliant because I can just pull bits off from that. Started this whole project by just grabbing lots of different fonts. I found a font is a good way to set the vibe for the rest of the logo. Some weird ones, some normal ones, and just anything that I thought had room for development. Managed to find this picture of an electric motor, which is what the icon is based on. And I thought that would be a good thing to pull into the pasteboard as well, just so I've got something for reference. I wanted to look at simplifying the T icon that they use as well. So I started looking at different ways we could do that just by making a much more solid blocky shape without the little like finer points. I made the T icon just by making a circle with a stroke on it and then splitting that at certain points just to get our curved shape. By carefully calculating the rotation, you can make sure that it actually works when you rotate it around 6 times or 8 times or however many times it needs to be rotated. I think at this point I was rotating it 8 times, but actually when I looked closely at the motor, there was only 6 coils coming off. When I was in the process of making the T icon, I thought it actually looked quite cool when I did duplicate it into a circle, and I thought that might work quite well as an icon, but it actually looks like the electric motor more, and it makes quite a nice shape that could be used for patterns and future branding. So I wanted to give a bit of attention to the word mark, so I started playing with how we could link the letters together and how we could make the S sort of resemble the coils that go round on the electric motor. You see them metallic coils. Perhaps we could make that similar kind of shape, something that indicates it. It's not going to look exactly like it, but something that just indicates it. You could also say that this curved S looks like a road, a bend in a racetrack or something like that. At this point I wasn't sure whether I was moving in the right direction with this word mark. I wasn't sure if it was just looking like something out of the 1980s or if it was looking modern. And I think when you put the text on its own was starting to look old-fashioned, but then when you put the icon with it, it kind of brought it to the modern day. Maybe it's just retro cool, I'm not sure. Let me know what you think in the comments. I also duplicated that up and started trying to put some rounded corners on it, but I wasn't sure how I felt about them. I'm not sure whether it weakened the strong logo we'd just built. I decided to grab the existing word mark. Just wanted to see if there was anything I could do with that to like clean it up and modernize it. And I started by just filling in a few of the gaps, but then what I actually ended up doing is completely redrawing the whole font and just curving off the edges. I thought that had the essence of the old word mark, but kind of made it a little bit cleaner and a little bit more sleek and stylish. Now that I had a few of these icons, I just wanted to look at combining them with some of the fonts that we chose earlier. So looking at this new wheel icon we made, and just seeing what font works best with that, just trying to get that visual balance. You don't want the font to be really, really thick and then the icon looking weak. It needs to all be balanced and look nice. Kind of difficult because there's no one set rule for design. It's just, does it look good and does it fit its purpose? If there was one set rule, every logo would look the same. So sometimes breaking the right rules is the way of achieving something that stands out and is interesting, because it is so subjective. What 10 other people love, one person will hate. You just can't please everybody, and that's fine. So I started introducing this dark sort of cool grey. I thought that sat quite well with the red. It gives it that little bit of contrast. To create that, I think there's just a touch of cyan in there. and maybe a little bit of magenta. Just not grayscale, it's got a little bit more colour in, so it just gives it a little extra depth to the colour. Yeah, we're just playing around with some different positions, different locations. Try the circular icon in a square just to give it that visual interest, and also for the future, like if this is going to be on the front of a brochure, where would you put the logo, how would you display it? When it's on the website, where would you put the logo, how would you display it? Do you use the T as well, or do you just use the word mark? It's all stuff that you're kind of thinking about in the background when you're creating these. When I went back to this icon and had a look, I suddenly thought that it looks a little bit thin. So I went back to our circle, changed the position of the two lines that we used to cut it so that the aperture was a little bit wider, and then just rebuilt the icon from that, and I think that looks quite a lot better. And also it fits in with the 6 parts of the electric motor, whereas earlier the one I made fitted to 8 parts. So you see that when I rotate around the existing Tesla logo, it doesn't make a perfect circle. So I wanted to try and fix that with our new simplified icon. So I started out with a circle, cut that into pieces, and then made sure that it looked like a perfect circle when you actually rotate it round. And once I had it in, I noticed that these little lines here were too thin. So I added another line, put a stroke on there until I liked the look of it, and then set that to the background colour. I just spent a little bit of time fixing the spacing issues that we had. I just like that space to be all nice and even, so it doesn't look like we've got little thin lines and fat lines, like it ought to be consistent and neat and tidy. With our new T icon, I decided that perhaps we could put the text on top of it and arch it over so it fits the exact same curve as the top of the T. And I think that one turned out all right, although I'm not sure that the gradients I was looking at turned out all right. I think a single colour would work much better. Notice that on the little picture that we've got in the pasteboard there, we've got the coils going around, they're metallic coils, so I started looking at some ideas of how to introduce that, or an icon of that, but it started looking a little bit spindly. But maybe I could have developed more if I spent more time on it. I ended up redrawing the existing Tesla word mark just with single strokes, rounding off the ends, and I thought that looked quite nice and modern and slick. It has exactly the same footprint as the old one as well, so we could just try that in exactly the same position. I also thought that looked quite good in a red box, but I wasn't sure how to introduce that alongside the actual icon. But it's definitely good to see it on a darker background as well, to see how that looks and make sure it works. Because when I was building that icon, I used just grey stroked lines to increase the gaps between the spokes. I had to expand it and then use the shape builder tool to unite all of the objects. I find that sometimes for things like that, it's a lot easier to do that rather than pressing every different Pathfinder button, trying to work out which one you need. That shape builder tool really comes in handy sometimes. Again, I was just looking at how we could curve that text to fit in with the top curve of the T, seeing if we could get something that looked nice and balanced. Probably noticed that when I'm creating these, I try lots of things very quickly. That's just how I like to work. I think it's a lot better to try 10 things in 5 minutes rather than sit there trying to perfect one option for hours and hours, because you can quickly validate the idea. Sometimes the ideas in my head don't translate very well, and sometimes ideas that I didn't really think would be very good suddenly come out really nicely in Illustrator. The way I like to work is just try things very quickly, build everything you can now and filter them back later. Because when you're in the later stages of a project, it's hard to suddenly pick up a new idea and run with it. Whereas now, when the juices are flowing, you can just quickly try lots of things, and then you've got more to filter down later, which is always helpful. Started looking at these circular icons and I thought they were quite interesting. The little plates on the outside, taken from the shape of the electric motor. I think it makes this cool shape. Just trying to achieve that balance between the size of the text and the size of the icon. Sometimes it's quite hard when you're putting the text within a shape, because the shape is taking up a large footprint and then your text is only 10, 15, 20% of that. Just want to get that balance, because when it's on something like a business card or in the header of the website, it needs to stand out and you need to be able to read it without the logo being absolutely massive all the time. Or if you do want to make an icon like that, you just have to have a secondary word mark on its own that works in smaller situations. So because I liked that circle icon, but the text was looking a little bit too small in the middle of it, I decided to add this red tab off to the side, just as a way of increasing the size of our logo, and also it makes quite an interesting little shape, quite a nice footprint, and we've got our text much bigger, so it'll be much more readable when it's used at a smaller size. I started looking at this idea where we take a square and then have the T busting out of it. I guess it symbolises their innovation and thinking outside the box and everything like that, breaking down the barrier of the logo. Thought that could work. Then I started playing around with some of the shapes. I thought this one looked a little bit too much like a gravestone. That downward curve is like just a sad face. Was developing up lots of different ideas around this. Knew the concept could work, it was just a case of actually making it work, which pretty much is what design is. It's just making the best of every little situation you've got, making sure it looks good and is functional. For this option I just went back to basics. I thought we'll just get a nice sans serif font, make it quite bold, have a square icon with the original Tesla logo in there. Inside it, whited out, just nice and simple, classic, and then perhaps started playing around with the idea of using a line as well. Just like one big solid underline, which is just a good way of making it have a little bit more presence. Say it's in the top left of that website we saw earlier. It's just going to have a little bit of a bigger footprint and just look quite dominant and solid, which is good. And the line also opens up a lot of other options that they can use in their branding. Maybe you have the line and it always goes off the left-hand side of the page or something like that. Just little design elements that we can think about later, but it's nice to think about now as well. Okay then, so that's pretty much it for the design process. I did a little tiny bit more tidying up of some of the corners and just some of the paths, but here are the final options. So after all of our designs, I actually think that option 1 is probably the best. I think a non-drastic change would probably be the best thing they could do. All we actually did was round some of the corners of the T badge icon and create a new word mark, but which is actually based almost exactly off of their old one. It's just filling in all the gaps and rounding the corners. Let me know what your favourite is in the comments below. If you like this video, remember to like, and if you want to see videos like this every week, well, remember to press subscribe.